I am Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's Trump Watch. Well, the big news around the Caribbean killings is the fact that the U.S. national security establishment, specifically the Pentagon, killed two people who had survived the initial attack on their boat at the hands of the U.S. military. They were apparently waving their arms up in the air, no doubt seeking help. They had survived this attack. And what was the response of the U.S. military? Kill them all. They just fired another missile and killed these two people, which is just so shocking. To me, nothing could be further shocked the conscience than to kill two people who they really had no right to kill in the first place. I mean, we shouldn't forget that. They've got no legal or moral authority, the military does, of killing people on the high seas. I don't care whether they're violating U.S. drug laws in the first place. In fact, what business does the U.S. government have extending its drug laws to international waters? Is that not the classic mindset of an imperialist? That we control international waters all across the world? That we can enforce our drug laws over here in these international waters? And the drug war, it's just a criminal offense. They're just enforcing drug laws, which of course have been in existence for, I don't know, how many decades, 6, 7 decades, that they've been waging this war on drugs, putting people in jail for the rest of their lives, no-knock raids, asset forfeiture, where they're stealing money from people on the highways, all with this notion of, we're going to win the war on drugs. You got federal judges, federal prosecutors have been waging this thing for, ever since I was a kid. As y'all know, I grew up on the border there, the U.S.-Mexico border. I've seen this drug war being waged. I had friends in high school that were hit with felony convictions for bringing an ounce of marijuana back from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico into Laredo. They were attacking drug kingpins way back when, and I was there practicing law in the late 70s and early 80s. The criminal defense lawyers were making a killing because of all the drug cases they were bringing. And, of course, you have all the mandatory minimum sentences and the judges that have been waging this war with high jail sentences, and it just keeps going on and on and on. The federal judges today, who were kids back then and went into their law schools and got indoctrinated with how important it was to win this war on drugs, they're doing the same thing the federal judges were doing back in the 70s and 80s. They don't realize it, that they're just saying the same things. We got to win the war on drugs. I'm going to give you a high jail sentence. And the jails are filled with drug people. And so that's the real root here. That the Pentagon and the CIA are using the drug war as their excuse to be killing people. Not that they need an excuse. We all know that they have the power. Ever since the U.S. was converted to a national security state back in the 1940s, the national security establishment, which had never been part of America's governmental structure, this was all new, as President Eisenhower would later point out in his farewell address. There was no power of assassination. In fact, the Fifth Amendment expressly prohibits assassination. But once it was converted, as a practical matter, as a fact, this part of the federal government, the U.S. National Security branch of the government, and it is a separate branch. We like to play this little game of where, it falls within the executive branch, but it's not. It is the most powerful branch of all. It is the branch to which all the other three branches, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, defer, that they automatically acquired the power of assassination. So if they wanted to just kill these people and not use the drug war as the excuse, who's going to stop them? It's kind of amusing, tragically amusing, that all these mainstream commentators are pointing out, which they should be, because we're pointing it out too, manifestly illegal. The drug laws are a criminal offense. They can't kill people for committing a criminal offense like drug law violations. That's not our system of government. The DEA can't just go out and start killing people that they suspect are violating the drug laws. That's our system. But everything changes when the Pentagon, the CIA, the big elephant comes and says, we're now taking over the role of the Coast Guard, and we're going to take over the role of the DEA, because before the Coast Guard would stop people on the high seas, still enforcing drug laws in international waters, but they would demand to be boarded. There's almost never any problems. These guys in these boats don't resist overwhelming force like that. They know they're going to die if they do that. They'd rather just go ahead and get arrested. And so the Coast Guard would say, we want to board your boat, okay, and then they'd find the drugs and bring them back to the United States, put them in jail for the rest of their lives, and the process just keeps going on and on and on, The drug lords are making big money anyway, even though periodically they lose a shipment here and there. It's just a cost of doing business. The drug war bureaucracy, the federal judges, the federal prosecutors, the Coast Guard, the DEA, they all got their jobs. They can pay their mortgages with taxpayer-funded money and so forth. So it just keeps going on and on. But that's been the system. But then the military, the big elephant, comes in and says, we're going to take over here. We're going to show you how to enforce drug laws. And so we're learning why our American ancestors prohibited the military from enforcing criminal laws like drug laws here in the United States, because they just think in terms of kill, kill, kill. They're the military, duh. So that they don't need the drug war as an excuse. They could just go out and start killing people over there on the high seas, because that's their power. They can kill people here in the United States. I mean, we learned that when they assassinated Anwar al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son Abdul Rahman. American citizens just assassinated him. Nothing's going to happen to them. The Justice Department isn't going to prosecute them. The Justice Department is subordinate to them. Justice Department is part of the executive branch. That's the subordinate branch to the National Security branch. Congress, oh gosh, don't make me laugh. They're so scared that the National Security establishment will get mad at them. They'll might cancel military bases or projects in their home states, so that they're not going to get involved here. And then there's a lot of military veterans and CIA officials there in Congress. Congress is going to defer always to the national security establishment. And then the federal judiciary has made it very clear over the years, especially since the Kennedy assassination, we're not going to touch them. They got the power of assassination, and that's all there is to it. And because the judiciary knows they can't enforce their orders anyway. I mean, suppose they issued an injunction saying no more killings in the Caribbean, or no more state-sponsored assassinations of American citizens. The national security establishment just ignores the order. How's the judiciary going to enforce its order? Against the 82nd Airborne Division, or something like that. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the power to enforce their orders. That's been one of the real flaws in our judicial system, our constitutional judicial system, is that everybody knows that they can't enforce their orders. They don't have the means to do that. If somebody they're trying to enforce their orders against, like the military or the CIA, says, to heck with the orders, we're not going to comply. Now, the thing is that they know they've done something wrong here. You know how you can tell that? Because they didn't release that video early on. That when they first started these killings with the first boat attack, President Trump said, "Oh, we've got these people, we've killed them, and look at the video." And boy, they were all crowing about these killings, but they didn't acknowledge the existence of the second killing, the ones where they killed the survivors, and they kept it hidden. That's how you know that they know that something's dreadfully wrong here. You don't kill survivors. Well, of course, for me, you don't kill anybody over there that's suspected of violating drug laws. You bring them to justice if you think that they're violating criminal statutes. And the fact that they come up with these other inane things like, they're terrorists, Jacob. Well, terrorism is a federal criminal offense too. You can't just go out and kill somebody that you say, he's a terrorist. But Oh, we're at war, war, war. That's the other one there. Whenever you see all these alternative justifications for killing people, you know something's not right. Oh, we're at war, war, war. Really? Where's the war? Well, they're invading America. The Venezuelan refugees are invading America. It's ridiculous. There's no invasion. Invasion is what the U.S. government did to the people of Iraq. Death and destruction and so forth. A narco gang, Jacob, narco gang. We're at war with the narco gangs. It's ridiculous. What, like the war against the mafia here in the United States? Would that justify assassinations and torture and all the other things that came with this? So as I wrote in a blog this week, I said this whole thing is shameful. I mean, it's cowardice. That, in my opinion, the Navy ought to come up with a ribbon that says the combat cowardice ribbon. I wrote that in another blog this week. Because that's what it is. It's cowardice. Now, not that cowardice in the sense they're running away from these boat people because they're scared. Cowardice in the sense that in the military, you can have a killing that's very dishonorable. And so dishonorable that it crosses the borderline into cowardice. Like I wrote in my blog, if you had an instance of where a guy here in the United States was suspected of transporting drugs on the highway, and the DEA and the state police are setting up a checkpoint to stop him and search his vehicle, and then the military comes along and says, "Look, we'll handle things here. We're the military." And they use a drone to fire a missile that blows up the car and kills the guy. And they're saying, yeah, see, this is the way we deal with drug dealers and so forth. I would consider that a very dishonorable killing. I mean, just so dishonorable, so disgraceful that it would, to me, cross the line into cowardice. It's just a cowardly way to do business or to deal with the drug war. And that's what this whole thing is. Now, so, the root of the problem is the drug war, but that really wouldn't get rid of the problem because they'd kill people anyway. You can see that a large part of what's going on here is the regime change operation. That Trump wants to get rid of Maduro. He wants to please the dissent there in Venezuela, and clearly the dissent, the opposition to Maduro is morally in the right, if not legally in the right. It's clear that he stole that election, but he's got the national security establishment backing him. So he's sending a message to Americans, is that this is the power of a president that's got the military on his side. He doesn't need to leave office. Okay, he can just say, "Hey, I won the election." Okay, and who's there to stop him? You got protests in the streets. He starts shooting a few protesters. So everybody's got to go into hiding. And so that's the power of a national security state. This is why our ancestors, the framers, our founding fathers, opposed standing armies, these huge national security establishments, because of this risk that when the president combines with the military, now sometimes they're in opposition to each other, like President Kennedy took them on. Okay, he lost. But he did take them on, and no president since then has taken them on. Trump acted like he was going to in both of his campaigns. Oh, the deep state, the deep state. Notice he never talks about the deep state draining the swamp anymore, because this is the deep state. The national security establishment is the deep state, the military, the CIA, the NSA. They're the ones in charge. No president since Kennedy has dared to take them on. The federal judiciary after the Kennedy assassination. Look, deep down, they all know what happened here. It's no secret. They know what happened, and they got to play the game. Oh, low nut, to play the game so that everybody acts like, oh, no, in our national security establishment, it's different. Thank the troops for their service, Jacob. It's not like, Venezuela's national security state or North Korea's national security state. Ours is different. Well, it's no different at all. Kennedy took him on, they took him out, and they come up with a ridiculous lone nut magic bullet theory, and everybody's expected to believe it, and a lot of people do, because the national security establishment, as I've long pointed out, is like a god to many Americans. It's like a god. It's a triune god for them. It consists of the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, which is really just one great big military block. It's a standing army like our founding fathers talked about, or as Eisenhower referred to it, a military-industrial complex. It could be called a military-industrial empire, because it extends to international waters, to bases all over the world. And this is our system of government, like it or not. And the message they're sending with these killings is get used to it, embrace it, accept it, because this is a fact of life. We can kill anyone we want, and nothing's going to happen to them, and nothing will happen to them. What's going to happen? A criminal prosecution? Don't make me laugh. The International Criminal Court, like they're doing with Maduro. Not going to happen, because the U.S. national security establishment will never recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Now, Trump's situation is very interesting, because commentators are saying that this is a war crime. Well, I don't believe it's a war crime, because they're not at war. You have to be at war to have a war crime. It's just an extrajudicial killing. But regardless, it's still a criminal offense. Now, the Supreme Court has said, essentially said that Trump can do whatever he wants to as part of his official duties, and they're going to hold that he's immune. But that doesn't apply to other nations. And so Trump's situation is very interesting, because the people they're killing are not only from Venezuela, they're from Ecuador, they're from Colombia. And those people do not recognize the legal legitimacy of these killings. In fact, they say the exact opposite. And so what happens if Trump, after he leaves the presidency, is traveling to another country and they put out an extradition request? Now, lawyers would say, well, no, that can't apply. They don't have jurisdiction over this. But look what happened with Pinochet. Pinochet flew to England after he was out of office and to get some medical treatment. And Spain said, you killed some of our citizens while they were living in Chile. We're going to prosecute you here in Chile. And so there's a long legal battle, and Pinochet ultimately lost it. Now, he didn't ever have to go to Spain, because they gave him a health excuse for sending him back to Chile. But legally, if he had been in good health, they were going to send him to Spain. And so what happens if Trump is visiting whatever, Spain, and Ecuador says, we want him, stand trial? What's to stop them from taking him into custody? At that point, he's not part of the U.S. government anymore. He doesn't have the U.S. military and everything backing him, which might well be the incentive for him to stay in office and for a continuous term, maybe for the rest of his life. Because if he's got the military and the CIA and the NSA on his side and supporting him, let's say there's some kind of national emergency, what's to stop him from just staying in office like Maduro has? Okay, you can say, well, Jacob, that can't be. This is the United States. Yeah, and so, there was once a time where nobody could imagine the U.S. government assassinating Americans or assassinating anybody as a policy, but they do. And so once you've got the executive combined with the military national security establishment, there's no way that can stop them. This is why our founding fathers were so opposed to standing armies, because they're so powerful that even a well-armed citizenry is not able to do much. And of course, they're kind of laughing at this thing. They're kind of mocking it because Trump, pardons this president of Honduras, former president that was convicted. I mean, this guy went to trial. I assume it was a jury trial. He was convicted of importing, 400 tons or something like that of cocaine into the United States. He was convicted. He was serving a long jail sentence. Not that it would do any good, because they've been convicting people, like I said earlier, for decades, or killing people, like the drug kingpin Carlos Escobar. They were all obsessed with him back, I guess, in the 80s or so, and they finally caught him and killed him. And so what? It just keeps going on and on and on. But in the midst of all this brouhaha with, we got to enforce the drug war, we got to stop drugs from coming into the United States, Trump pardons a drug kingpin that was convicted of being a drug kingpin. I mean, it's just the whole thing's just ridiculous. Do you ever get the sense that it's just mocking and ridiculing and laughing at us? Uh, and then there was two other survivors. I'm surprised they didn't kill them. They took them into custody, and instead of bringing them back and putting them in a prisoner of war camp, because they keep saying we're war, the fog of war. Secretary of War Hicks says it's the fog of war. What fog is there? I don't see any fog. But they released those guys back to, I think it's Ecuador and Colombia. Why would you do that? If you're there trying to kill them because you say we got to stop them from bringing drugs into the United States, why would you then release them back to the enemy? Does that make any sense? I mean, if this was a real war and the U.S. said our policy is to not take any prisoners of war, instead we're going to return them to the enemy forces, would that even make any sense? That's why this whole thing is just so ridiculous. And it's amazing to me that Trump is going along with all this, because remember when he campaigned, he said no more foreign wars, no more of these foreign escapades, and drain the swamp and so forth. And then his first time in office, in my opinion, he was absorbed by the deep state. He just essentially just became part of the deep state. And again, I see, in my opinion, the same thing happening now. He's been absorbed. He's part of them now. Threatening an invasion, closing the airspace among Venezuelans, which means we're going to possibly shoot down airplanes over your skies. I mean, that's amazing, just to say your skies are now closed to airplane traffic. Wow. That in itself is an act of war. The fact that you send the CIA in there, which undoubtedly has the power of assassination, that in itself is an act of war. Imagine if Russia or China or North Korea were to do that, or Venezuela were to do that here in the United States. We're sending in our intelligence forces to assassinate American officials or disrupt the economy. I mean, remember all the brouhaha about Russia interfering with our elections? I mean, here's the U.S. government threatening an invasion of Venezuela to upset that election. Now, it may have been a fraudulent election, but who died and made the U.S. government the king? It really is phenomenal. And now Trump has endorsed a candidate for president in Honduras. So he pardons the former president of Honduras who had been convicted of this drug offense, but he also at the same time endorses a candidate for president there, a right-winger. Now, if that's not interference with the electoral process of a foreign country, I don't know what is. I mean, what if Putin had endorsed Trump? Don't you think the U.S. press would have gone ballistic? What are you doing interfering in our system? And yet it's all met with just, this is all normal. Trump is endorsing candidates. Just like a Republican, just like a Democrat. I mean, you ever get the sense we're living in bizarro land? The other thing that we need to keep in mind on this thing is that all of these things don't go away. I mean, this drug war is perpetual. It's there for good. And so all the things they do to win the war on drugs, drug war killings, they don't go away. They never go away. Have you seen asset forfeiture go away? And yet, what did asset forfeiture do to win the war on drugs? Didn't do anything. It's still going on. If it had won, there would be no need to keep going on. But they never take away the things that fail to win the war on drugs. So the screw tightens and tightens on the American people. And things keep getting worse and worse from a liberty standpoint. And mark my words, don't be surprised to see more these irrational killings that take place periodically in our society at the hands of off-kilter people. As I've said before, when the U.S. government is showing no regard for the sanctity of human life. I mean, look at this in the Caribbean. They could have taken these people into custody. All they had to do, they got destroyers there. You think these boats are going to be able to fire an M16 and sink a destroyer? It ain't going to happen. And they got aircraft carriers and B-52s. I mean, there's drones. The soldiers don't even have to get close to the boat. They just use the drone to fire the missile. And so all they had to do is demand that they surrender. and have their boat for inspection like the Coast Guard does. They didn't do that. They just kill them, which shows no regard for the sanctity of human life. Well, that's the mindset that guides these killers here in the United States. Now, you may say, but it's different, Jacob, because the people they're killing here in the United States irrationally, like children in a school or whatever, they're American citizens. Well, okay, for an American, that might be a distinction. That the life of a Latin American foreigner in a boat that's maybe possibly transporting drugs is not as valuable as the life of an American citizen. But in the minds of the irrational killer, he didn't see it like this. He says, it's a copycat killing. They're killing over there, I'm going to kill over here. Now, I can't explain how the process works. It's just my theory. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. But I think something is triggering these off-kilter people to engage in these things, and I think it's the lack of regard for the sanctity of human life. You know, Martin Luther King pointed this out. We honor King. We've got boulevards named after him and a holiday and so forth. But we really have never come to grips with what he said that made him so mad and which caused him to kill him too. That the U.S. is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. Think about that. Biggest purveyor of violence. Bigger than North Korea, bigger than Russia, bigger than China, bigger than Venezuela, bigger than every other country. The biggest purveyor of violence. And when he says the U.S. government, what he's really referring to is the national security establishment part of the government. The Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. Nobody can deny that the accuracy, the truthfulness of King's statement. This is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. It's impossible to know the exact number of people that they've killed in my lifetime, but it's got a number in the millions. And, you know, they think, oh, well, there's not going to be an adverse reaction here because it's happening over there. They're just foreigners, Jacob. They're just foreigners. They're Latin Americans. They're not as valuable. Their lives are not as valuable. They're Iranians. They're Iraqis. Whatever. It doesn't matter because it's over there. As long as our soldiers are not losing their lives in large numbers, that's what matters. And so the idea always was, oh, this can't affect American society. Go about your lives. Go on vacation. Go to your jobs. Everything's fine. Just leave the killing to us. Well, that was all fine and good until these off-kilter people started popping up and started doing off-kilter killings, irrational killings. And my hunch is because the screws are tightening and tightening and tightening on the American people, as you know, including these drug war killings. That the screw tightens, you know, like on the drug war, acid forfeiture, mandatory minimum sentences, because they're very frustrated and angry that they have never been able to win this war on drugs. In a sense, they're frustrated and angry. They like the fact that they have to keep continuing it because it gives them a chance for more power and more money. But I think these are copycat killings, these irrational killings, and they show no regard for the sanctity of human life, as we can see. But by the same token, the U.S. national security establishment shows no regard for the sanctity of human life. As we've seen, the perfect demonstration is there in the Caribbean, where they could have, if they had wanted, demanded the surrender of these people rather than just going in there and killing them. So it's what I've said from the beginning of this foundation, 36 years ago. The biggest enemy to our freedom and our well-being lies not with Russia, China, Venezuela, North Korea, Vietnam, the communists, the Reds, the Muslims, the terrorists. No, the biggest threat, the biggest destroyer of our freedom and well-being lies right there in Washington, D.C. And specifically and especially, not just the national security establishment, there's also, the drug war people and the welfare state people and the regulated economy people, but the biggest one at the top is what Martin Luther King called the greatest purveyor of violence, and that's the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. And as long as we maintain this type of governmental structure, as compared to restoring our founding system of a limited government republic, we're going to pay the price. And that price is loss of liberty, out-of-control federal spending and debt, disharmony with the people of the world. Things are only going to get worse and worse. That's Trump Watch for this week. Thank you very much. As you know, we have our end of year fundraising drive taking place here. We need your support. You've kept us going for 36 years, and we need your support again to get us through another year. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for your great support of FFF and your commitment to the principles of a free society.